All right, Jason, thanks for joining us. Welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you
Awesome.
on.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Let me do some quick introductions and then we'll do a little bit of a high level of topics and we'll jump into things. So we've got Jason Burley. Jason is a group vice president at Grande Custom Ingredients. We've also got Brian Doyle, who is the president and CEO of Holden Advisors, and Patrick, who is a partner at Holden Advisors. So we like doing these roundtable style. We've got a lot of things that we thought would be good to cover with you, Jason. Anything from leadership through pricing and sales. I'm sure you've got a ton of stories around negotiations that you've been part of over the years. So I think a good place to start is if you can tell us, Jason, a little bit about Grande Custom Ingredients and what the company does and about your role there. Let's start
Sure.
there.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you guys. It's going to be a lot of fun. And it's great to see some friendly faces and old friends and people we haven't spent some time with. I serve as Group Vice President for the Custom Ingredients Group at Grande, where I get to lead a team that provides dried powdered ingredients that are made from whey, a part of the cheese making process. And so we sell derivatives of whey protein powders as food ingredients into food manufacturing for anything from creamy sauces to cheesy dips, all throughout the spectrum of food manufacturing.
Cheese, the most important of things.
It all starts with the cheese, right?
Maybe a starting point from your experiences over the years. I'm sure you've seen a lot of companies that you've got like the pricing function and the sales function, and then there's a very particular bridge there that can be tough. What are some of the lessons that you've learned in leading across both pricing and sales, things that you've seen work? Just start kind of broad there.
Yeah, I mean, I spent most of my career at Cargill. I think that's a pretty well-known fact. And so being at Cargill, I had a lot of opportunity to spend some time with a lot of folks that you are well aware of. And one of them being Lynn Gwynn, helped me tremendously in kind of understanding that bridge. But the reality to me was finding this out basically in trading terms is that when you're procuring grain using a sales process, that negotiation is really about finding the market. And so the merchandiser obviously wants to pay as little as possible. The sales team is trying to, garner favor with farmers and get the best price he possibly can. And when you bring those two things together as not two separate functions, but as, the place and where that friction creates the market, that's the best of both worlds, right? And so I think that's where I started, and I think I've carried that through into other industries and other places that sometimes doesn't feel like it's going to fit at the beginning, but ultimately it usually does or always has.
Well, it's such a leading question, right? That's one of the biggest struggles at any company that we work with, period, right? You have two opposing entities or seemingly opposing points of view, right? They're not actually opposing, but people believe they are because of the way that organizations are set up. And I think, Jason, what we experienced with you in the past and at other organizations is actually, I hate using the term, but creating a team style environment. You get the best of both, right? And it's good to have opposition. It's good to have disagreeing opinions, because then you actually build something greater than if just everyone agreed all the time, right? To bring that customer's perspective in and still have that internal perspective represented by another team. It's where those two meet, as you said, that I think you get the greatest end result from any situation.
Yeah, I think this is great, Tracy. The way you set this up is that this conversation then sparks other things along the way. I'd love to see what Brian has to say, but the reality is the more effort and the more time you spend in developing your people, especially around business acumen and how the organization actually works or how you make money, alleviates some of that stress and tension between the two opposing forces. So they get to the place that Patrick just talked about understanding this is good, right? This is good for us to get to. Nobody has to be on the losing end of this, and we're not adversaries, specifically internally. But you also don't have to be adversaries on the external negotiation either, right? So there's just a lot to learn, and it does kind of come back to this, development of people and how much time do you invest in them to understand, how your business works?
Yeah, I'll take like a half step back, Jason. And it's for me, if you're pricing for your value, then you're probably going to be okay. Because I think having been a salesperson in the past, I want to take care of my customers. And if I feel like some internal force, whether it be the pricing organization or somebody else, is doing wrong to my customer, then I'm going to oppose that. That's not the right thing to do. But if I'm on the pricing side and I'm actually pricing for the value that I'm providing those customers, and then right where you were, I'm teaching my salespeople how to articulate that value and have a conversation, then they can feel confident that they're not messing with their customers. Their customers are getting what they're supposed to get. And by the way, they're paying for it, but that's cool as long as they're getting what they're supposed to. And then I think that starts to come together a little bit more instead of one side is like maximizing revenue and the other side is maximizing a customer relationship. And there's nowhere in between. I think we can bridge that gap.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think you would say you see that in the best organizations. The places where you're probably having the highest level of profitability is in the organizations that understand that meeting, not necessarily in the middle, but in the right spot is the most important
Yeah.
of the entire journey, right? Because all too often, I think people default to, well, okay, well, we're just going to finally get to a place where we meet in the middle, whether it's internal with your own pricing team and your sales organization, or externally, you start from that mindset. Well, then you've taken value right off of the table, to be quite honest. That's not what you're positioning. You're just simply trying to work your way to the middle as quickly as possible. And that ultimately ends up being good for nobody.
Right.
When you're working with teams, just thinking about mindsets, right? And like discounting as a mindset. In some companies, discounting is a very normal way of approaching sales and closing deals. How do you shift mindsets around discounting in particular? Have you seen specific things really work well there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful segue or bridge from, Brian talking about value, but the real way to get away from discounting is going to value-based selling. And, that is the trick. If you want to change mindset, you got to get out of the price game. I shouldn't say pricing, the price game, or the mindset that's where we start, and get to value creation and understanding what the true value is between what your offer is and what the customer is really willing to pay. Like I don't know where I heard this, so I want to attribute it appropriately, but I always default to change the deal, change the price, right? There's no bad deal. It's just where we started might not be able to come to fruition. So if we got to change something, that's great. Well, then we're gonna have to change the price.
Right.
When you
Yeah,
start,
we talk about it in terms that we use the term give get, but it's
Sure.
the same sort of thing. It's like, hey, if I'm giving you a reduction on the price, and what am I getting? I'm providing you less, whatever it is. And those things, as long as those things are moving in parallel, that's okay.
Yeah, right, especially when ultimately you get to a place where everybody's happy. I think these conversations are interesting. We'll probably find it in a different question at a different time, but the idea that somebody has to be the loser is one that has to be eradicated very early, in my mind. Nobody has to be a loser in any of these negotiations. Probably a little more personal than you want, but if you spend some time with, in a marriage or a relationship, there's this concept of, do you really want to fight to win? Because if you do, that means somebody had to lose. And if somebody loses, guess what? You get to spend your time with the loser. And nobody really wants to do that. It's not healthy for any relationship. It's not healthy for a personal one or a business one. So I think eradicating that idea that somebody's going to lose or we're going to win has to be subordinated to, how do we develop the right value creation for what the customer needs, that's acceptable to us. And that mindset shift, I think, really helps.
It's interesting, Jason, because I think one of the things that we see, not necessarily in your industry, but across different industries, is with the rise of procurement and professional functions, there are some times at which common sense and this idea of fairness or no winners, no losers does come into play, where the people that we're dealing with are, I'm going to use the term, it's a misnomer, but level-headed, right? They see the bigger picture. There are a lot of times where we're helping advise a client and they're working with someone who is irrational, who is not level-headed, who does not see the big picture. What do you do in those situations? Not you specifically, but how do you help your people get past that type of behavior? Because I think you're right. Absolutely, right? It's not about winning and losing. It's about finding the best solution and best price value alignment for every customer situation. Sure. If they're acting irrational, though, how do we help the person on the other end of the line get there?
Yeah, I mean that's a high hurdle, Patrick. I mean, that's a big one. But I think that it's really important that when you're developing a team and you're developing, an understanding of how your business operates, that you simultaneously understand, what I like to call walk away criteria, right? Like not every deal needs to be won. And so you have to have some sense of walk away criteria that is respectful of yourself and of your business, where you don't need to, participate in the irrational, this kind of stubborn unwillingness to negotiate in good faith. And I think when you empower your teams to understand that, you don't get dinged on every closed loss deal, then you can start to help develop that. And that's, we've done that in almost every organization that I've been in, where we say, we want to understand what it really takes to get us where we need to be versus do anything at all costs to have a high win rate. Because ultimately, we're not learning anything and we're probably on the short end of that stick. So I guess that's been our approach. But man, that's a hard one. It's really a hard one emotionally, right?
And I love seeing you in this elevated role, Jason, and I think it's fantastic. So as a group vice president, you can sort of say, this is how we think about things. What's your advice to the folks who are watching this who maybe aren't as senior and they have that mindset that you just described, but they're afraid that their manager or their manager's manager is just all about the revenue and hitting the number, and they're maybe encouraging them to never walk away?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of come out of the recent environment. I think the COVID era really helps in this, and this is going to be an interesting transition. But you think about self-care, self-representation, and those types of things. I think, you know, for a young, newly tenured sales professional, you have to set your own standard and your own brand. And I think that it's important that you understand the value of long-term relationships and selling value over quick wins for the sake of a dollar, which ultimately, never works out. You and I, or all of us on this call, know full well we've seen we've seen the rep or the sales professional that gets the quick hits, knocks them out of the park, has a great time, negotiating inside to get discounts and price,
Right.
and yet ultimately is probably the shortest tenured professional on your team. Is not long for your organization. So I think that the first place would be, really understand who you are as a professional to begin with, and your own personal value, and what those core values you're going to bring to a sales profession. Then there's the real world. You have to probably find opportunities to demonstrate what right looks like, and you have to demonstrate your commitment to these kind of long-term approaches that not everybody espouses to that.
Yeah. Yeah. And if I'm reading between the lines correctly, I mean, you're talking about sales and being ready to walk away from a deal, but what you're also saying is, it doesn't matter how junior you are, you have to have your own moral compass and you need to live to your own personal values. And if that's doing the right thing all the time, that's doing the right thing all the time. And if your organization can't handle doing the right thing, maybe you find a different organization.
I mean, there's a very real possibility. There's a real reason why I'm sure that you've seen it in many really good organizations that the cream rises to the top. And people want to participate in organizations that have strong core values that are tangible, that you can really see and feel. They don't want to be in an organization that talks a talk, but then has a different walk. And, I've been fortunate, so I don't have a lot of insight into the the other side. I've been lucky enough years with those kinds of companies possible for us to do that. In fact, it was encouraged for us to do it and still is. The, I, I just think people are generally good and people generally know what the right thing is to do. And when they're in an environment where that doesn't exist, it feels uncomfortable and it's not enjoyable. And so, maybe the end of this conversation or this particular question is, if it doesn't feel right, it's probably not, and it's probably not sustainable. And, it's one of the things for us at Grande that we talk about a lot is this a sustainable way of doing business? Nothing short and flashy for us is sustainable. So, we have to operate in a different place. And I think that applies just to individuals as well. If this feels like it's going to be short and flashy, it's probably is, and it's probably not sustainable. So you might want to think it through.
One of the things that we talked about were providing options, or a different deal is a different price, right? How do you think about that in terms of giving your sales team autonomy in terms of different solutions or how they're structuring deals? And how much is that built into, I don't want to say moral compass, but they're just the way that they operate versus the programs, the systems that are in place at Grande? And honestly, I don't know. So it's a truly open question.
Yeah, well, I mean, like anything, it's a combination, right? I think we have systems in place, or we're building systems today that will allow for greater autonomy of the sales force. I think when you have the right people, you make the hard decisions on the front end. I like to call it hiring hard. Then you get the right people in the right place that can make those kinds of decisions independently, with some guardrails, because we're all human. But you can put those tools in place that do account for changes in the deal or what we're going to do or what we're going to give. And having an approach, or a strategic pricing approach anyway, methodology, really helps with that. And then you can start to pull different levers. In my experience, you provide like a strategic pricing model that has target, floor, and some accelerated top end. And you start to see people navigating towards achieving over target versus always ending at the floor. Then you got a new lever to pull in terms of incentivization, and usually it pulls people along. It takes a while to get there, but I think the three things are: hire the right people, hire hard, give them the right tools so that they can be successful, and then you probably want to incentivize when they show the behaviors that you're looking for.
Yeah. I would imagine there are probably a lot of different experiences that have kind of molded your leadership style over the years. One of the things that at least stands out to me when looking at your experience is your time in the military. Are there things that really shaped you that you can see, that really helps me with sales? This experience really molded how I lead in this way. Are there things that stand out to you from that time that you still kind of embody now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the totality of the experiences probably led me to kind of what you get today, which, spent a couple of years doing those things. But I think there's some themes. One strong theme for me is really about preparedness. And we used to call it the 7 Ps, but in the modern times I have to call it the 6 Ps. And that's prior proper planning prevents poor performance. And, being prepared is really, a cornerstone of professionalism, especially in this profession. And when you start to think about that, there's 2 more Ps that come up for me inside the military, which, is preparedness and professionalism. And I think it's a breakthrough when you get sales organizations that start to see themselves as professionals. Like, this is a profession that requires continuous learning, skill development, specific competencies to be successful, and that you work on those to become a professional, and then you work to be prepared for what you're going to go do next. The sales professionals that I see struggle most often are the ones that think they can wing it, that they really believe they can just, they're so star-spangled awesome that they can just wing it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it ever worked. It certainly doesn't work today.
What about for you, Brian?
So I like what you had to say there, Jason. I think probably, correct me if I'm wrong, at least in my experience in the military, it's just the ability to handle stress. You've been in lots of different really stressful situations. And so when you get to a deal negotiation or you get to a customer who's unhappy or something like that, you have a mindset that one of the things that our team has heard from me more than once is that it's not an emergency unless lives are at stake. And I imagine, I'm certain, in fact, that you bring that sort of persona, mindset, whatever you want to call it, to your leadership style, so that when it feels like a crisis, it's like, yeah, this is important, but you know what? We're going to go home tonight. We're going to eat a hot meal. We're going to sleep in a bed, and it's going to be okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's super fair. I don't often make those kinds of correlations, although they're true. There's a big difference between winning a deal or calling in a medevac. Those are two radically different experiences. So I think it's real. When I look around, I look for the people that are calm and kind during great adversity. If you find the people that are kind and calm, that's your leader, right? Those are the attributes that you're looking for. And those are the ones that you see. And if you scratch a little bit deeper, you find all of the kinds of leadership traits and attributes that you're probably looking for. And I think it's important in our day-to-day.
Yeah, we're being a citizen
Yeah.
in the United States, right?
Right. Let's talk about negotiations a little bit, because there's just throughout your experience, I'm curious just your perspective on negotiations that stood out to you. Like, I think it would be good to get into some stories and just tell us about some negotiations that you've been a part of that stuck with you over the years, and what about that or lessons that you learned from it that stayed with you over time. Can you think of an example?
I wouldn't tell you that I have a specific negotiation that stands out, because we've tried for so long to not make the negotiation be the standout of the relationship, where we haven't tried to make that be the thing that was, remember that time where we had that monumental win because Burley negotiated the heck out of that. That whole mindset, that whole mantra has really been not where we've wanted to be. We've wanted to kind of reduce the heat around the negotiation itself, move to other attributes of the sales process, talk more about the things that Brian and Patrick have brought up, the value creation, and how do you sell value, and how do you do that in a way that is complementary to both sides getting what they want. Everybody gets the deal that they deserve basis the value that was either given, created, or purchased. And so I've thought about these memorable negotiations. I'll share an anecdote later, but we really tried to go a different direction. We really, really have, or my personal experience with the teams I've been a part of.
Yeah, that's great, because I think there is something about that transition that would be noteworthy for any company, right? That you don't have these big, it's all about the moment of the negotiation and big blowups or anything like that. That would be a goal, I would imagine, for a lot of teams, is like, how do we get to that point where we're more talking about value throughout, and it's an ongoing conversation rather than like kind of this pinnacle of decision or something,
Yeah, because in the life cycle of the relationship that you're trying to create, that negotiation should be this big.
Mm.
Right?
Right.
That's the front end. And now we've got everything else for the lifetime of that customer, which if we continue to, present the same value for the same for the same deal, that we should be able to preserve that for a long, long time. And that, that's kind of goes back to what we were talking about. How do you get individuals to do the right thing? If we can demonstrate those types of things that, look, long-term relationships with valued customers that create, value for both of us, that's a good thing.
Yeah. What are the things that you've seen be most effective there in kind of feeding these long-term relationships, building them, nurturing them in the best ways? What are the things that your team is kind of expanding and growing in there?
Yeah, so we spend a lot of time on the front end trying to identify and uncover what the actual unmet need is, or the actual pain point, or what's really driving the connection between our organization and theirs. So, what is the purpose? If all I'm going to try to do is dump a product into a thing because I say that it works and I'm not solving anything, then we're already starting to develop the unnecessary friction. So we spend a lot of time, probably more than most, in discovery and really trying to identify what is it that we can solve. I've always espoused that salespeople are really just problem solvers. And if you don't like to solve problems or puzzles or come up with solutions and be a servant to your customer in that way, you're probably not really going to last long as a sales professional. So that's where we try to spend as much time as possible. And then I try to keep them completely out of price discussions in that entire process. And that sometimes takes a little effort because some longer tenured sales professionals that might not have moved through this kind of development are often stuck in, yeah, but I know that they're just going to be disappointed in the price when I get there. This is all for now. You gotta work through that to help even your own team understand the value that you're creating, or else you're never going to get across the finish line.
Yeah, I think, Jason, in my experience, it's the same. Sometimes we'll have clients who come to us and say, we have this big negotiation, can you help? And we say, well, yeah, we'd love to. And then they go, great, because the RFP is due in a week. And I need to know how to fill in the spreadsheet. It's like, we're not going to be much help to you if it's how to fill in the spreadsheet. This
Yeah.
is like, let me teach you how to do this 6 or 9 months ahead of time. When you do quarterly business reviews, everybody does QBRs. What are you talking about? That you're unveiling all of this value at the 11th hour. What were you talking about 3, 6, 9 months ago?
Well, but my favorite part about that, Brian, is, yeah, we've waited until the final hour to unveil all this value that we're delivering, and the customer's like, yeah, but that's not valuable to me.
Yeah.
You have that problem. You're not fixing anything. That's not a concern of mine. Those are all really great things, probably for Bob, but for me, they're not a thing. And that's to your point of what have you been talking about? Because these are misaligned. They are not connected.
Yeah.
And I think, it's a huge part of the process, and it's a huge part of mindset shift for salespeople to think, I have to do something right now.
Do you find that most of your customers are open to those types of conversations?
Boy, I mean, it's varying. The place where so first of all, there's a couple things. In our business, getting out of the procurement office is your number one best thing that you can possibly do, right? And get into the innovation, R&D, technical, marketing parts of the business to really learn. And then you get those things. But in procurement offices specifically, you can go from the hard-nosed, we don't play anybody's games, I'm a procurement professional, all things stop with me kind of behavior, all the way to the open, amicable, how do we approach this? How do we be mutually successful? And I haven't put enough time in, and this is probably a takeaway from the call for me, is to do some analysis on if there's any correlation to who those people are. Because anecdotally, I've been thinking, when I think of startups in our space, young entrepreneurs, they are more likely to be, hey, I need help. I'm a one-person operation. I don't really know everything. Are you willing to help me solve this problem or do this cool thing that I want to do? They're probably more like that. High-end big CPGs, less so.
When it comes to staying aligned on the value that you're delivering, what have you seen work there? You're calibrating probably more frequently beyond just the QBRs. What is effective for your team in that arena?
Well, I guess I heard two different things. So value alignment internally, I think we spend a lot of time just on, the differentiation and functionality of our ingredients, which is the value proposition. So set that aside. This alignment with customers or along the journey really goes back to what do you do? What's the problem? How are you fixing it? And there's a fun technique that, you see a lot in trying to create demand, which is I do this, it's valuable to these types of customers. You're one of those types of customers. Are you seeing that same kind of problem? Well, when we've used this solution to fix it, we've gotten this result. What would you think about that? That kind of helps them through the value journey to identify either for themselves that is something that they experience, or at least it gets you to, yeah, no, we're the unicorn. We don't experience that same problem that the rest of the industry is. So thanks for coming. But it also helps us get to a point we had way earlier in the call, which is okay, great, walk away.
Yeah.
The problem doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
This is our solution. This is the kind of problem we would expect to see. It apparently isn't there. Great, walk away. I mean, if you're really being, pragmatic, or at least thinking through the totality of a deal between two parties, that you're going to have to move somewhere. And to get to the best outcome, which is kind of one of my personal mantras, I want to just get to the best outcome for everybody. How do you do that, and what are you willing to do to achieve it? And that way there doesn't have to be somebody that loses.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I have not heard that before, when you're like, okay, if you have a negotiation and you win, then you're with a loser. That was I have not heard, that is not where I thought you were going with that. I have not heard that take before. I like that.
And we see it sometimes, Tracy, people looking to hire us.
Yeah.
And if we were to roll over and acquiesce to some ridiculous request, then how in the heck are we going to coach and train them on negotiation?
Right.
Like we just exposed ourselves as not being any good at this, not sticking to our guns, not understanding our value, not all of those things. So it plays the same way. It's like, hey, this needs to be a matching of peers where both people are like believing in what they're getting out of this, and then you move forward together. I like how I said that, Jason.
Talk about proof point of my own value proposition. Sure, send me another email like that. I'm happy to receive it, because this is exactly what I'm going to teach you not to do, or how to avoid, or to do differently. So, well, there's a lot of buyers and sellers out there, right?
There are.
We get this kind of uniqueness of I should say, spending time in a kind of a finite group that operates in a specific place. But I can't imagine what you see or have experienced or have had to work with across the totality of all the types of buyers and sellers of all the industries across the globe. I mean, it's monumental.
It is. Hey, one other quick question. So we're seeing, since COVID, and I think you hinted at this a little bit, but we're actually seeing procurement go through their ebbs and flows, or the pendulum swing, and we see them being more constructively focused and really looking at the other side of this equation. We always say, hey, procurement has two roles. A, they have to produce reliable supply for their company. That's their primary role. The secondary role is to try to do that in a more cost-effective manner, right? We see that pendulum swinging back in some of our client examples, and we're hypothesizing if this is some lasting effect from COVID, where reliable supply is still in the forefront of their minds. Do you see that currently with your teams and what they're dealing with?
Yep, no doubt about it. I mean, in a supply chain scenario, it is still very, very high on the list. Secured supply, reliable sources of supply, domestic supply is still, remarkably on the forefront. And I think it's a driver of that procurement office to ensure, we used to say in in the grain business, the last thing to go into the grinder is the merchant, right? Like you could never run out of grain. And I think that kind of mindset is prevalent still today in a lot of procurement offices or supply chain managers. But I also think simultaneously that there is a sense of, how do I work together for the long term, right? How do I work together beyond just assured supply, but a long-term partner in my business that I truly can partner with, and get beyond who's going to win out the extra penny on the day type of mindset. And it probably has been fueled by we can't shut this facility down, so make sure you get the right partner. But I think maybe has fostered a little bit, hopefully a little bit more of the how do I interact with other people and create real partnerships. A lot of the time I get kind of like pigeonholed as the soft underbelly. And if my longtime good friend Pat Rogers listens to this, he'll get a chuckle out of that, because I used to be seen as the armadillo, but I'm really the soft underbelly of the organization, trying to move to this space of you can be highly professional, you can stick to you can understand your worth and your value, but you can do it in a way that doesn't have to be distasteful or put people off, or have you be someone that nobody ever wants to work with anymore. I mean, the two can be true at the same time. And so, you go back to this professionalism and preparedness piece. You can walk people through that in a very well prepared and professional manner that helps people get to this same spot. They don't have to be, independent.
I like that. Sounds like a good journey to be on. Great. All right, maybe we wrap up there. We covered a lot of ground. Thank you, Jason. It's great to have you on. Really appreciate your perspectives and being able to do this together.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Great chat, and we'll see you soon.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right,
Always
thanks.
a pleasure, Jason. Always a pleasure.